I'm Michael Guarrine, and I've been in Chicago for quite some time now. I've played in many bands over the years. Most notably, probably Watchers was my bigger band. Two bands right now. One's called Wet Leather and the other's called Nude Model. So both, one's recording a record, the other is desperately trying to play out right now. Mm-hmm. Yes, I sing. I do play synthesizer. I'm a Moog prodigy. Yeah. And I dabble in squonky guitar.
Throw down some mad performance styles.
Occasionally, yeah. I like to shake a tail feather from time to time. So what you gonna do? It's chemical. It's chemical. My performance is influenced probably by the record I'm going to be talking about today to a certain degree. But so that, and then I've worked in social service for years, so doing stuff with. My last job was a community-based organization, so I was doing preventative health work there, so that was good. I chose No New York. Compilation, actually. So there's 4 bands featured on it. A lot of people know the Contortions, or James Chance and the Contortions. Teenage Jesus and the Jerks. So a lot of people know who Lydia Lunch is, and this was like one of her first bands. Mars on the bottom here. DNA right here, and Arto Lindsay, a lot of people know, and this was Arto's band. And so I feel like this no wave movement was, for me at least, probably one of the most interesting things, and probably one of the more influential kind of times in music for me, and just the bands that I was playing in and stuff. In the 90s, I was in a band called Assembly Line People Program, and so we had a, I don't know, following is the right word, but people knew what was up and various things. And so as Assembly Line was happening, Liesl Walter, who was at that time in the band Flying Ludenbachers, I was just a kid, growing up in the suburbs, and I would come in to see shows, and I would go to the Fireside. But by that time, I was living in Chicago, and so, I would go to these shows and see this music, which they were like sort of loosely referring to as now wave, right? And so it was like Skin Graft, that label had a bunch of these bands, and then unrelated but still kind of we're seeing like trench mouth, and and so it was really exciting in Chicago because you could any night see something that would like completely blow your mind, and all these bands were like scrunky, like, and everyone was like like freaking out, and there's a lot of performance aspect to it, so at in my early 20s and later teens too, because I was seeing those bands for a while, it was just awesome, and so I sort of befriended Weasel, and at that time I don't know if you could really be Weasel's friend per se, but he sort of, I don't know, not took me under his wing, but he definitely, kind of noted that I was trying to do something a little different, and so he was like, I can't do a good Weasel impersonation, so I'm not even going to try.
We'll have to get Jim
Magus
to
Jim
do
Magus,
it.
exactly. Jim does the probably the best impersonation ever. But anyway, Weasel took me aside, and he's like, yeah, you should check out this band, The Contortions, and I was just like, and it sounded awesome, and he was talking about James Chance and all this stuff, and so I was very curious, because it was like, oh man, and how do you? And these records were not easy to find. I mean, it's kind of fascinating because a lot of these no wave bands, a lot of the early stuff that I read about them, they were always compared to Thelonious Monk, and so I was a huge Thelonious Monk fan as a kid, and it has to do with Scottie Pippen. Okay, so there is a very strange commercial or I don't know, strange, but a very interesting commercial that Nike put out, and it was about Scottie Pippen. And the commercial lasts, you can find it on YouTube, it's actually pretty awesome, I'm glad it exists. And it is about a 35-second commercial. And it's just all these quick cuts to Pippen, to Scottie, like dunking and doing all this stuff, and they're comparing him to Thelonious Monk. And when I was a kid, I had no idea what Thelonious Monk was, and I was like, that name sounds crazy, what's up? And so there's like this little like 1.5-second clip of live, like Thelonious Monk playing live, like dun, 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 and then cuts to like Pippen dunking, And so as a kid, I was like, wow, this is amazing, because I like love Scottie Pippen, and this neat thing, So I was like, I gotta find out who this Thelonious Monk guy is, So then I started like finding out who Thelonious Monk was. So after Weasel told me about James Chance, he was like, check it out, Contortions, blah, blah. So I started doing all this research, and then I found out that a lot of the no-wave bands were compared to Thelonious Monk. So I was like, this has got to be, it's like, it's a sign, So I then just would go and try and find these records, So Assembly Line, as we got more and more kind of known, I had a weird connection with that band Blur, and so Graham Coxon, the guitar player, he and I, just from me going to shows, and this girl I was dating at the time, we would go and see a lot of these like Britpop bands and stuff, and we befriended Graham, and so it was kind of neat just having that, and he was really into Assembly Line, so we actually ended up opening for a leg of their East Coast and Midwest tour, and so I would always send Graham tapes and stuff to England. I'd be like, hey, check out this, check out that, and so some of the no wave stuff was like reissued on CD, right? So it was easy to kind of make tape, so I think I put some Contortion stuff like on a mixtape for him, and so we would talk, and he was like, man, that Contortion stuff's cool. I'm like, yeah, it's like amazing, and so we would talk about a lot. I was like, but the thing is like, you gotta get No New York, that's the one, and he was like, oh, No New York, so
and you still didn't have it?
Did not have it at this point, so it was just like, how am I gonna get this freaking record, like, and so we get there, and they were staying, I vividly remember this, we got out of the car, and I see Graham, and I was just like, I look crazy. He's like, you look crazy, and I was just like, I've been up for 2 days, and he's like, go upstairs. He's like, there's something there for you, right? And I was like, all right, like, whatever. And so we get into his room, and they have like this. It's a hotel, right? So they've got the thing and a mirror, right? And propped up on the mirror is this record, and I'm just like, fuck no, like, holy shit, like, this is crazy. And I kind of lost my mind a little bit, and I thought like he had got it for himself, right? And then he walks in the room and he's like, got this for you. I was just like, oh man, you know. And so it was just like, whoa, you know. So then made this record even more special for me, you know, because like, wow, you know, that was pretty neat. So then got it back home, and you know, I put it on, and it was the coolest thing ever, you know. It's like, because I'd known a little bit, but now finally I was able to like hear this record, and it was just so abrasive and so intense. So Brian Eno actually like recorded these bands, and if you ever followed Eno's career, I mean, you know, this is like post like Roxy Music, right, and even post Another Green World. And so he was like deep into his ambient projects at this point, right? So like if you put a Brian Eno record on in like 1978, you were hearing like music for airports, you know, it's like, you know, and so, but in the times, right, there was a lot of like really like you know, cacophony, having all these crazy bands, and like, you know, punk had like completely, you know, gotten in, and now it was like this art rock scene, you know, and stuff. And so, and New York was like, you know, the mecca of that, you know. And so Eno was working with the Talking Heads apparently at the time, and this was like their Fear of Music period. And so he, I guess, was in town mixing or recording, I think mixing their record. And so, you know, there's all these like kind of like little festivals or mini things happening, and bands playing and whatever, like, you know, local spotlight or whatever. And so there was this kind of this festival where these bands were playing. And so apparently Eno was like just at the show, and he saw like the Contortions, Teenage Jesus, Mars, and DNA, and he was like, this must be documented. Like, we have to do this. Like, get them into the studio. We need to do this. And I always knew that like with the James Chance stuff, like it always like spoke to me the most, because it was this kind of like really sort of punk rock, very caustic version of like James Brown, you know. And I love like soul and funk and all that stuff, but like I'm not James Brown, right? You know, no, not too many people are, you know. He's James Brown. And so it was just like, how can you kind of have that energy but do it, you know, in your own way, right? And I think James was definitely like trying to do that, and I could definitely identify with that. And so Chris Baroner, I don't know if you know Chris, but he was doing booking at Metro at the time that Watchers was playing, and he was a big supporter of ours. And there was some connection to him and James, and it was like, he was like, hey, would you consider backing James Chance? And got back from tour, and the phone rings, and it's a New York number, and you know, I answer the phone. I'm just like, you know, hello, whatever. He's like, yeah, this is James. You know, I was like, you sound like Jimmy Stewart. You know, like yeah, I'm looking for Michael. You know, and I was like, oh yeah, that's me. He's like, oh yeah. He's like, I think about doing some Contortion songs. You interested in that? You know, and I was like, yeah, sure. He's like, good. He's like, I'll get you a list together. You know, I'll send you a list. And I was like, okay. And I was like, really, this is happening? You know, and so, you know, we got this list of Contortion songs to play, and you know. He's like, yeah, it'll be great, you know, I'll come out, you know, we'll do some shows, you know, it'll be good, you know, okay. And so then James and I then kind of became this weird friendship / kind of working music partnership thing, and he would just call me randomly sometimes and just ask me questions, or like try to get gigs and various things. But he's very private guy, but his stories are amazing. One of the first shows was in Detroit, and so Watchers would open, and then we would just stay on stage, and then we would just back him. And so we played our set, you know, and he was always like, yeah, good job, guys, you know, like he was always nice, you know. And then you get on stage, and you know, at this point he's, you know, a little older, obviously, and you're just kind of like wondering, like, what's gonna happen, you know? And just, you know, boom, and then just the magic, and he just went out and just slayed it, you know. But the funny thing is like, he's used to these like shows. The shows in New York are really intense. Like there's stories of him just like jumping off the stage with this like sax and then just like careening into the crowd. And so this show in Detroit, literally like 2 bars into the song, jumps off the stage, tackles this woman, and is like rolling around with her on the floor like all crazy, and then grabs the mic and just like back up and just like doesn't miss a beat, and the woman was like totally into it. She thought it was awesome, because we're all just, and I just remember everyone in the band just being like, uh-oh, like, like, are we gonna get,
But you do that stuff.
Yeah, I do. But, I guess just like when you see someone who's like, in their 50s doing it, you're a little like, uh-oh, like what's gonna happen. But it was just funny, that's what he does, and I commend him for just doing that.